I'm excited to share Bill as an exclusive sponsor of the Thrivecast. They have been sponsoring the Thrivecast for so long. Thank you, Bill. Our firm has been using Bill for over a decade now. We actually use it in all of our foundational CFO and controllership engagements. We have to turn all of our clients' financial processes digital, and we do that with Bill. And you can check out some webinars and blogs and even toolkits that I build with Bill to help in your firm. So thank you, Bill, for being a sponsor of the Thrivecast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thrivecast. This is going to be a great one. You're going to hear this during October, which is during Deeper Weekend. So we may mention some Deeper Weekend stuff, but we got some other really cool. This is a big, important announcement podcast. Ian Vacin, co-founder, everybody knows who Ian Vacin is, Chief Customer Officer of Karbon. He's like the co-founder of Karbon. And this is like a big, massive global company. Now, if you think he's a nerd, you're right. Let me give you his pedigree. Bachelor's degree in Industrial Engineering Operations Research, APICS certification, nobody knows what that means, a master's degree in Engineering Management, 6 years in high-tech manufacturing, Green Belt in Six Sigma, co-founder of Karbon, and you've been into it zero. Ian, welcome to the Thrivecast, man.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yes. Random things behind the title.
That's right. What did I leave out in your bio that's really key about, that helps you do what you do now?
I don't know if it helps me, but I do have an MBA. So
okay.
I have two master's degrees. So I think I know what I'm doing, but maybe I really don't.
You're really, really super smart.
Let's talk to my spouse about that.
Well, this is going to be cool. This podcast is really going to be cool for a few reasons. Of course, you and I are really good friends. We've been on the road. We've done road shows, hugs. Yeah. We've done road shows, teaching together for years. But this is the first time you're going to teach at Deeper Weekend.
Yes.
Which
I'm
is
super
really,
excited, by the way.
Really pretty cool. And one thing you bring is tons of research. And if anybody's seen Karbon's practice excellence reports, I think there's been 2 of those. You're working on a 3rd one with some data analysts, scientists from Berkeley. Those reports are really mind-blowing globally how the accounting profession's working. So is that a right summary of this, what you call the PE reports, the practice excellence reports?
Yeah, we started that practice excellence report. Actually, we kicked it off in the test at Thrivecast Deeper Weekend in 2017. Little bit of lore there.
Wow.
Thrivecast Deeper Weekend, by the way, 10 years plus. Man, I think this will be my 12th year.
That's crazy.
Yeah, best place to go deep. Best, in my opinion, place for entrepreneurs, for folks to get together. So you all should check it out if you haven't. And if you didn't get to go this year, definitely you need to go next year. But we kicked it off back in 2017, and it's been one of the longest running surveys that's been in the accounting profession. And I'm really excited about this 2024 report because now we are well over significance, and we've got some snippets in terms of pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID.
Oh, wow.
And it's a full diagnostic on how you run your firm and what happens when you look at that over time. So it's one of the longest, I'd say, longitudinal sort of surveys.
Yeah, but I think the last one I studied was 2022, I think.
That's right.
And so y'all were just starting to mention some COVID-related things. But if you do one now, the labor market's even different significantly than it was in 2022. Even not just labor in firms, but firms are different, right? Because private equity has ramped up in the past 2 years in massive, massive ways. So it really eager to hear what that tells you. What does the Practice Excellent Report say? And again, let me just say this real quick. You're going to be talking about some of this research at Deeper Weekend around productivity, which is kind of what the science and practice of productivity is the theme of Deeper Weekend. You're going to really be taking a research topic, and it's going to be a lot of this. So, I mean, what are you seeing with firms in the past few years? Like kind of what's changing, what data research is proving things out?
So it's interesting because I've been in the weeds of this data literally as we speak. So I've spent the last 3 days looking into the details of what we just got out. As a framing, the practice excellence does not measure technical capability or technical aptitude because you can't really tell, is this particular accountant better than that accountant and doing a tax return. So what it's doing is it's analyzing the business health of the firm. What are you doing in your business actions? And we measure it on 12 different vectors, I call them, which is everything from business operations to strategy to marketing to sales, whatever, it's 12 of them. And they get wrapped up into 4 aggregate categories around your management, your strategy, your growth, your efficiency. What's really fascinating is we saw in COVID, going into COVID, that firms' inputs, that's what the practice excellence score is, measuring your inputs. What do you do in your firm to make it a better firm versus your outputs, which is measured by revenue per employee. For lack of better things, it's the most simplest metric we could do.
Sure.
But the revenue per employee has gone up significantly in the last year alone. Wow. It's gone up in aggregate post-COVID a bit. And this goes to what you just talked about from a resourcing standpoint. In a world where your supply and demand curves and your resourcing pool has shrunk, what you have to pay for those resources is going up. You could call it inflation, but in this case, we're talking about strictly from a lack of supply. And so, and because some of that work is being outsourced, that doesn't get counted as actual employees. So if they've been insourced, meaning you hired some people, they're part of your team, then they would.
That's interesting.
But the other thing that's occurred is while that cost of labor has gone up, and we can see that in the data significantly, and over the last year, there's this divergence that the cost of labor has gone up, but the actual practice excellence scores have gone down. Which is the first time it's gone down in the last 6 years that we've measured it.
Wow.
And there's this sort of bifurcation that's occurring of where there's firms that have gone up, there's firms that have dropped. And what I put that to is, and I'm still going through the details, so you have to wait for the report when it comes out, which will be out roughly right at Deeper Weekend.
Nice.
The suspicion is it's being caused by those who are looking to sell their firms, have stopped investing in the firm itself, and are putting pieces in place for it to prop up value in order to be offloaded to somebody else. So that is what we're seeing in the last year alone. Post-COVID, if you took it as an aggregate, it has gone up. The amount of work I've done investing in my firm has increased. And it's increased in areas around management and talent because of the labor market.
Right.
And so we're seeing in the data anecdotal things that we've been talking about, but we're seeing behavior shifts in firms, which in my opinion, in a small 1 to 2 year time frame, is very quick reactionary activities that I would normally see in a 5-year span.
Yeah. That's interesting. Earlier this year on the Thrivecast, I talked to an accounting professor, and this goes to the point about labor. And he said the profession hasn't generally paid, entrants, freshmen into the profession very well. Some of the large Big Four do. And he said that's changing. So firms are paying a lot. And of course, I've been running a firm for almost 30 years. So the labor has gone up. It's much more costly than it was before the pandemic. So I'm hoping what you're seeing and what we're seeing where salaries and labor, they're being paid more is going to change, the profession. It's, there's more competition. There's a lot of people exiting the profession. Private equity, a lot of people are unsure what that's going to do. We're going to find out probably in 4 or 5 years kind of how that's going to turn out. And by then, the labor hopefully will be paid a pretty normal salary. Though it's hard on the firms, they're going to adjust, because they're raising prices. They just raise prices slower than what labor is requiring to be paid to enter into their firm. All of these things, it's wild. We're going to see them converge over the next 4 to 5 years and see what our profession becomes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty nervous a little bit around the infusion of private equity cash. I've been in industries and worked in places and seen kind of what can happen. And I think this is for everyone in the Thrivecast to take aware of. There are good players, and there are people who are taking rents that basically want to make a quick buck. And so, that's going to have a significant impact on the profession overall. And it'll be a different world in 5 years. So we see a lot of consolidation that's occurring right now, unprecedented, never seen anything like this before. And there are different models by which to do it. You and I have talked about this in several different webinars around how that acquisition behavior is happening. And we are a pretty big test bed to see what's going to go forward. So not necessarily be scary, but it is a thing to watch out for.
Yeah. Well, it's cool that Karbon's investing in this kind of reporting to kind of give us summaries of the profession, so to speak. I don't know if there are other reports that deep. I don't know. I don't think there are.
I haven't seen it. This is a personal passion of mine. You and I know, again, it goes back to, I like to understand the place that I work, and I want to be able to help everybody out there, just like you, Jason, in terms of how do you navigate the seas that we're currently in.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It didn't used to change so dramatically. It was like every 7 years. And then going to COVID, it was about every 5 to 3 years. And now it's like every year.
Yeah.
And so you got to really stay on top of it. So
yeah, well, cool. Well, we're all trying to stay on top of it. That report's going to be great. What would you say? What should firms be doing? Like, we have 15 people. We're a small firm. Julie and we run our firm very daily. We're very focused on our leadership team. Meeting with our team. We're very involved. And we're not selling or we're not taking private equity. We're building our firm. What should firms like us be doing? What should we be thinking about right now from all this data that you're getting? Do you have some thoughts?
Yeah. So, and I'll have more to report on in a month, specifically today when this actually gets aired.
Right.
But some precursors of that are this: you're in a situation of a tight supply market. Okay. And you need to be investing in your people and your culture. The people that you have today, you need to retain for tomorrow. And that changes a bit in how you might operate. One of the things that we had seen in the previous Practice Excellence report, and it seems to hold true from what I've seen in the data so far, is the highest attributed factor to your success is internal training. That drives the highest impact on revenue per employee.
Very cool.
So there's a bit of complacency on that. But when someone's coming into a job and you have them in there, it's about creating the ability for them to be successful, confident, and enriching environment. And so one of those mechanisms is internal training. So I cannot express enough of that importance. The second piece of this, and where, again, your client demands are expanding. So we're seeing that as well. It's not just that your supply is limited, but what you have to deliver is being asked more of you. And you people are more or less trying to do more service work with less resources. So that puts much more weight on your efficiency side of the business, which is what you and I are talking about at Thriveable Deeper Weekend. And so how do you become more efficient? Well, you can go down my world, which is, your processes are king. Technology would be, is an enabler to whatever you have to work with. And so how you run your firm, do your processes are going to be capable, are going to be really important. And then when you add internal training on top of that, that adds a multiplier effect.
Yeah. And
those of you that are owners and entrepreneurs and whatnot, you need to be mindful of how does that service work get deployed at scale in an efficiency standpoint. And that's stuff that Jason, you and I have been talking about, which is it's not just about the processes, but it's about your strategy and management of the organization as an owner overall.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to get to that. But that's
I was giving a precursor.
Yeah, it's a little precursor to the announcement, which people are probably aware of. But so members in Thriveable, they're very innovative. So they've all been trying outsourcing for a long time. So if you talk to some firms, they're like, yeah, we've been doing it for 5 or 8 years. They've gone through different groups. A lot of them are trending towards direct hires in the Philippines, so they're moving away, which is an interesting trend, right? Globally, we can have access, to these direct hires. We don't need to go through a company to get to qualified people in the Philippines or India or something like that. Then Thriveable members are very opinionated too. They're entrepreneurs, and some of them are like, "No, I'll never do it. I'm a hard no on outsourcing. Always have been." Julie and I have never done it. But in different markets, you always start to assess different things. You go, what are my options, right? So what's your big picture view of the U.S. labor market is struggling, other labor markets are not. There's a lot of accounting talent all over the world. What do you think about firms outsourcing and the efficiency of it and the profitability and all that?
Well, I think I'm blessed and fortunate to have a broader view on things. So our company is global. And so I get to see what happens across 34 countries, specifically more of a lens on Commonwealth and North American markets.
Yeah.
So the Australian and New Zealand folks have had this problem sooner, and they've addressed it sooner. There wasn't as much reticence around privacy and security and things of that nature. So they've been playing in the outsource space.
Interesting.
And the evolution has been from, we're going to outsource by hiring an external team member that's not part of our organization, where we're going to throw low-level task-based work to them on a situation of, I throw you the work, you throw me the answer, I then take it to the finish line. And that's migrate. I call that outsourcing. The next one model that most people go towards that, because they need that labor to do more complicated. And when I mean complicated, it's one step up from that, but it's not that far from it. They use an insourcing model. And that's where you might use a particular outsourcer to help you find the bodies, but those people are going to be team members on your team.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing to note there is they need to be empowered. The culture needs to absorb them. They are not an offshore component.
Yeah.
They need to be treated as staff members in there. And typically you need to have a head or a person that you can rely on there to work with the team day in and day out to manage it on your behalf. That's a hard person to find. And then going further from that model is we see now what I would call your up workers that we used to have, but now we have what would be the gig economy, where I'm able to get high talent labor, maybe they're staff accountants or higher, that I'm going to hire fractionally, but I want them in my local market. And so there's quite a lot of vendors now that exist. I'm finding tax reviewers, maybe senior tax preparers. That's generally where we see that, where they're going to be an extension of your team in that true outsourced model, but they're higher skilled labor that don't generally exist in other countries. We used to see back in the day, it was in India. I've lived in India twice. I went to school there. And India had its problems with creative problem solving and being able to work directly with clients. And so the Philippines was more attractive because those problems were relatively solved. And there's been much more activity there. But we're seeing folks hiring in Central and South America, Mexico, where the labor cost is higher, but the ability to work with clients and be able to interact is better. And then there's been some, again, across Asia. So it really comes back to, you need to identify what's priorities for you, and then you need to work with what geography is going to serve you best.
Yeah. Yeah, we are seeing members in Thrival in South America, in Africa, West Africa. Those are Commonwealth countries. Not that's what matters, but that's where we're seeing people do that. And then, of course, India and Philippines. Philippines being the one most people outsource to, it probably has a lot of that infrastructure already in place. Maybe for, Oceania, they kind of required all of that from them first, and so they prepped the way as Australia and New Zealand outsourced.
That is what occurred. There was a lot of call center outsourcing to India. And then and that's where tech companies were going. But Australia and New Zealand really leaned into the Philippines because it was on relatively the same time zone. Yeah. And they had familiarity with how accounting was done. And just because of the amount of time and effort, it's really been an invested area where there's a lot of resources and folks who use that as a career. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting, and this is going to take us to our next comment, but it's the design of the organization, which was key. So what we're seeing a lot of firms do, they're like, I'm going to outsource, right? I need labor, and it's less expensive. Some people don't want to do that. They really have an ethical view, wanting that labor to be part of their team and pay them normal. But what they'll find is they will go to an outsourced labor model, and then they find out their firm organization has been built more of an advisory model. And they find the outsourced labor has to take a lot of recurrence tasks that where there's not a lot of friction with other humans. You don't have to talk to a lot of people. And so what they do is they outsource, but their organization is actually more advisory, and they find it doesn't fit. They're like, wait, you're not solving some complex issues. because an advisory firm has a more complicated scope and they're kicking over these problems, which is all our firm does. And it really sometimes wears our team out. And an outsource model would be tough because we would just be telling them how to solve everything. And so you just got to understand that if you outsource, it's got to match what you've already built and make sure that labor produces the kind of revenue that's simple, fast, recurring, and doesn't have a lot of friction in it, which is human-based analysis and solving. Is that how you see how that outsourced labor may have to fit with your model, and just be careful of that?
Well, I think there's a couple pieces on this. There was this comment, and I got, I see it online, and a bit of a push around is compliance dead? Actually, compliance is alive,
right?
And it's very much needed. So there's a predominance. We see this actually in the data too. Of one of the reasons for consolidation and aggregation of firms is you need to have all the compliance components to provide proper advisory. I need to know what you've done on your taxes. I need to know what you're doing in your payroll. Those things that usually were higher liability, more considered to be commodity, or they were commoditized, are now much more critical today because I cannot do advisory unless I can see the whole puzzle.
Right.
Now, what's happening is some folks that decide, I'm going to outsource my bookkeeping. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to have them deal with the unreconciled nature of things and fix it and get to a working set of books. But what happens there is if you decide to chuck it over a wall and it gets chucked back, then you don't know what was happening underlying within that particular compliance job or the various different work papers. And there it becomes very hard to do advisory. You end up having to do it twice.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we had to shift from outsourcing to what I call insourcing is the collaboration that needs to occur from those who are doing the compliance and the bookkeeping and that particular level of the work, because it needs to be transferred and explained to those who are doing the client-facing activities of that. And if you don't have that collaborative tissue and you're not having that type of exchange of dialogue and information, then you're finding that you're having to spend 1.5, 2 times the effort to get the same product out the door.
Yeah. It's all complicated.
It always is complicated.
Growing a firm is complicated, and knowing the capacity of teams.
As my co-founder likes to say, if you start a firm and you're an entrepreneur, you have to be insane. So welcome to the insane asylum if you're watching this.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy what y'all have built at Karbon. It's truly a massive global company, and you've only been around for how long? 6 years? No.
6 years, 10 years. We've been around for 10 years.
Oh,
It's
wow.
so hard.
Well, you went
Jason,
through a couple of name changes.
Has it been 5 years?
Wait. No, yeah, offend me, right? Hey, 5 years? No. Okay, this is cool. All right, so all of this is very complicated. So
anyway, just to recap.
Yeah.
You check out the session that we just had. Or again, if you missed it, you need to come to Thriveable next year, because this is where we go deep into topics like this.
That's right, yeah. And your topic that people just heard, maybe if you're just now hearing this podcast, yours is a heavy research and productivity session. And it's around this topic, capacity, the theme of Deeper Weekend, the science and practice of productivity. And again, this show comes out in October, so Deeper Weekend will be over when you hear this. But we focused on that because it is so complicated to know specifically human capacity. And you and I have been working on something for 6 months, which is very exciting to me. And you and I are writing a book together.
The marriage of the detail and the data and the research, and the brilliance of entrepreneurship, and how to navigate the waters.
So thank you for saying that about me, about the data and the research. No, that's not mine. That was you. Yeah. So
yes, we are writing a book together.
Yeah.
Drum roll.
Yeah. It's already been amazing. The book, I don't know. Can we just spend a few moments on reflections on the book?
Yeah.
I know we got to get to talk about what it's about, but the book is getting more and more complicated the more we're writing it, to me. And it's like, I think it's because of the topic we picked. So, I mean, some titles maybe Once You and I, and Julie, my partner, is project managing You and I, which is, that's a feat in and of itself.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, she's like, oh my God, getting you two to write the book is something else. But we do have a publisher that's walking us, through their process too. But as we go through this, we kind of pick the title "Human Capacity." And there were some subtitles. I think they're going to be building that out. But as we get into that, really, we're kind of through. There's 3 parts. We're kind of through part 1, not quite. And that really became a treatise on leadership, organizational design, and we got a lot into what capacity is. We were defining it. We're about to go to part 2, which is a lot of the complexities that you're going to be leaning into and a lot of that writing. But together we wrote part 1. And it was, are you surprised how complicated it became? I am, I think.
I knew when we'd write this book together, Jason, it was going to get complicated. It was going to get deep.
Did you? Okay.
I'll be honest, though. And for those of you out there, thank you for some of you that spent your time to speak to us around what you face and how you do it. We've done a lot of interviews, so we wanted to come from, not only what we see and how we see it, but also what all of you see, and make sure that those things line together. But it has been fascinating, Jason. When we dove into this, we had our understanding of what leadership meant, what management meant. Then how does that play into org design and structures? But I didn't realize how important org design and structures were. So again, this first part of the book has been a pretty amazing undertaking around dissecting exactly what it means to scale a firm and the sort of barriers and borders and struggles, and how that weaves so closely to the entrepreneurship mindset, your goals, your aspirations, and how that transcends into the culture of the firm. Yeah. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's been crazy. And I think the research, your career, I listed things when we started, is a very research-heavy career. So you have degrees in doing this kind of stuff. And I think you did it a lot. Of course, you're doing it massively in Karbon, but you did a lot of this research-type stuff on a profession in other, like Intuit, Xero, all these other. So you did a lot of that already. So you're bringing this skill of research, and it is mind-blowing what we're learning. And I think one thing that hit me, and again, you're leading a lot of the research and the interviewing, and I'm kind of learning a lot about that process, the technical data gathering of that. As we're going through some of these recordings and some of your summaries, to me, it's wild. We're seeing entrepreneurs running firms having trouble. They solve their problem, and we find they're solving it by changing their organization. They're like, this thing won't let me work the way I want. I can't scale anymore. And they restructure their organization, which is proof point to what you and I already thought was true, that the organization is massive for capacity to push efficiently and profitably through a services organization. And the research is proving that out, which has blown my mind. That's been so cool.
Yeah, I think the thing that's crazy about this, and for everyone that's listening in here, is that I'm blessed to partner with you, Jason. The fact that you bring decades and decades of you can literally at ground floor with firms working through systemic inherent problems. Yep. And again, humans are really complicated.
They are.
And when you put them together to try to work for a common theme, it gets complicated. It gets messy. It is hard. And for all of you entrepreneurs out there, again, live it as well. It is a hard journey.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for where we see these struggle points that occurred. And you and I had talked about this before we even started writing the book. The observations that you had coming from the consulting and working with these firms over the years, and me coming from a technology and how we design around some of these things, and then laddering in research that shows exactly where these are occurring and why. And then speaking to all of you that have been gracious with your time and going through why you had these struggles, how are you having to force a decision through it, how you may have navigated or not navigated it. And then being able to bring that to light. That to me has been one of my biggest passions, with the largest result, to be able to answer those really hard questions of when we talk to folks and they say, look, it is just so darn hard at this point in time. I don't feel like my business is like it was in the previous years. I don't know which way is up. I don't know what anyone is doing. I feel lost. Yeah. And to be able to have the answers of why that occurred, and be able to lay that out in a very succinct, may not be succinct based on Jason and I's writing, but it'll get there. Yeah. That's been fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been cool. And that's why you and I focused on this book is for service-based organizations that are scaling and growing. We're really going to be hitting uh, people with firm sizes 10 to 20, into the 20, 30, 40. So that's kind of where we're staying because there's a lot of complexities and you got to jump a lot of chasms inside of that, right? You hit $1 million in revenue and you keep going in a services company, you got to really have your stuff figured out because it gets really hard because the owner, the founder has stepped so far away from revenue production, from service, the frontline service work.
Well, they should have.
They should have, right. And if they haven't, they're some of the old school working 80, 90 hours a week and assuming other people will do that. And labor doesn't do that anymore. They don't work like that. And so the owners sometimes can't have their own perceived notion of, well, if you work 90 hours a week like I do, it's fine. And everybody and the new labor is like, you must be smoking stuff because that's never going to happen, and it doesn't. So you have a different labor market, but it is wild. And so this is a little bit broader, this book. It's not only firms, though that's where you and I have lived for decades. It is service-based organizations, and we're kind of going into consultancies, agencies, marketing, digital, just to see if some of these parameters still hold true.
And you know what's crazy, Jason? Because I was a little bit more focused on. We're going to focus on more specific on the firms, but service-based firms overall have exactly the same struggles and the same solves. The difference is the sizing of the firm changes slightly based upon the industry you serve in because of how you have your production engines. How you're driving economies of scale. So you're just shifting the problem up the scale of employee size or revenue size, but the same fundamentals apply across that. And that's what we're talking through, which is fundamentally, how are you going to handle your organization as a leader? How are you going to have to delegate and manage the managers underneath and be able to get the accountability and visibility? How do you structure the design around it? How does that lead to proper planning so that I can do essentially load balancing or work prioritization, load balancing, production planning, capacity planning, resource and demand planning, and what are the complexities that I'm going to face as I go through the different aspects of what we call the 3 R's. We won't go into what the 3 R's are, but we do have some nice little, I guess, copyrightable frameworks and whatnot. And so again, that's where the book's going to bring all that to light.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think when we've gone through this, really some of your engineering put a lot of time framing that I didn't know, because I would think I've taught a lot. Capacity planning is a very future-oriented planning activity, right? And of course, you confirm that it is, but it actually happens within different time zones. Not time zones. Time
Eastern
frames
versus Pacific, or
no time zones, time frames, basically. And so What we're going to be helping people understand is capacity planning is not this overall bucket of everything. Capacity management, that is how you get revenue and put it with your capacity, your team's capacity, happens differently in the present than it does in the next month, than it does in the next year, than it does maybe strategically in a 2 to 3 year planning period. So can you just talk a little bit about what are those time horizons really, and why do those matter for planning capacity and how you're going to get your revenue completed?
I didn't know we were going to go down this.
I know. It just hit me. This will be a good topic.
So I think, when you think about, so humans are complicated, so that's one, and time creates variability, and probability of success wanes the further you go out in time. And so when you're thinking of how you're doing your planning, the certainty of things is based on your position between present day and future state. And so for many of you, you do once a year planning, right? And it's really a shot in the dark with an arrow against a board, right? But it's essentially more aspirational in nature, which you are going to usually do. How much demand am I going to have? How much is the business going to grow between this year and next year? And roughly, how is that going to impact the resources that I have today and what I might need tomorrow? But if I look at where we are today, I can, with a pretty high level of certainty, know that what should the team be working on within this given month? How am I going to reposition what I have? Because it's a balance of demand is in my face, resources I can't necessarily bring in instantaneously.
Right.
So you have this balancing act on a time horizon of how do I deal with demand today, demand coming in sooner or in the medium term, and how am I going to realize the resources I have because I don't have unlimited capacity. This day and age, like you said, I as an owner working 80, 90 hours a week, my staff is not. I cannot flex to do these large jumps in seasonality curves. I need to be able to have a steady, as much as I can, steady state, which is impossible to do for service-based firms. And so that's where it's interesting how the organization design influences all this behavior on the planning side.
Yeah.
And how do we get predictability with the fact that we have time, and how do we understand how we have to ladder the resources and be able to flex that resource pool to match what we brought in the front door.
Yeah.
And then we talk about a little bit of the complexities. You and I have talked a lot about scope creep, scope seep, the capacity exchange bridge. How do you have those sort of contractual relations with your particular staff? How do you run that business to be able to minimize the amount of variability that you have to face across all different aspects of the firm?
Yeah. It's crazy. And a lot of our consulting that Julie and I do with firms it's very anecdotal. Right. It's very founder and entrepreneur focused. It's like, how do we help them change this business? And so a lot of our work is helping a founder change their organization through their own fear, their struggle. So there's a lot of counsel type coaching that we do in our work. And so we're putting tons of stories in this book from other entrepreneurs, and even from our own firm and from some of our own consulting too. And a lot of the research is proving out some of the things we're helping people do. And the variability thing was kind of big for me when you were teaching me that. It's like the further you get out into the future, obviously variability matters, so planning becomes more difficult. You don't know the resources you need in a year. You think you do. And so for a lot of smaller firms, we're finding they do not have any measurement or ability to know anything about their status of capacity. And that's becoming harder. You're needing to know that more. And that's why this book is important. It's going to teach you and show you how to determine it, know what it is, track it. It's got to become something that you track over time to know, so you can ramp up your revenue or acquire another small firm because you got the resources to meet that revenue need.
Now I'm going to lean in close to the microphone here, because it turns out that large firms don't either. They just have a higher likelihood to.
Okay. See, and they may have more money, so they just pay younger people more money to come work for them.
Now, one thing I do like to point out that in the book, we talked about the stories and whatnot that are going to be in there. The level of honesty that a lot of the entrepreneurs have shared, and what we're sharing in the book,
very cool,
is to realize the fact that for those of you that we've talked to a lot of folks that have perceptions of them having it all together, but when we dive into those conversations, they have just the same amount of fears, concerns, and worries that everyone that's listening to the Thrivecast today has. And so that is a given as an entrepreneur, is second guessing or thinking about, do I have things in order? And so those stories are going to shed the light that all those feelings that you have, everyone else has as well. And some folks have been really fortunate to be able to discover a path forward. And that's what we want to bring those stories to light. But some people have not been able to be successful in that. And we're going to highlight those stories too, so you can understand why that scaling barrier or boundaries that you then are going to face are, again, intrinsically involved in your own mindset, your entrepreneurship behaviors and patterns, and then how you may or may not decide that you want to grow a firm.
Right.
That is 100% okay. The outcomes are for you to determine. It's not for someone to dictate to you. So it's, again, we're going to discover those types of, we're going to talk about those particular aspects of it as well.
Yeah, it's cool. And one other thing about the book that it's wild. The research is matching what we've seen in consulting, which I love that. The data and research proves out the way you've been counseling people. And as we've seen organizations get bigger, as we consult with 20, 30, 40, and 60-person firms, we go, you're too bulky, you're too big. So you start chopping them up into departments. And when you're doing the research, you're finding the entrepreneurs who figured that out did it out of desperation. They're like, I don't know what 50 people are doing. And so they push them into a tax department. They push them into a CAS department. And then they start putting departmental leads at the head of those. Then they start having something where they can manage their knowledge And managing your knowledge and the flow of that knowledge through your organization on top of a tool like a Karbon or something becomes key to knowing your capacity. And it's proven out. The research is going, no, you're going to departmentalize if you want to become an efficient organization at this team size.
What's cool is that Jason has this concept of strata, and I have this concept of team dynamics. And we both had two different models.
Yeah.
And we learned they were exactly the same.
Very cool.
One based on research, one based on in-person consultation from years and years, which to me, again, goes back to, it's one thing to be able to have one side of the equation, but having both, and that's what this book provides, is really, really giving the answer that we see in practice.
Yeah.
Another thing to note is I got to talk to a lot of Jason's firms that he worked with over the years. And he does a damn good job because they have navigated through these waters and they've been able to speak about what their path has been and how they got there and what were the key things that happened that allowed for them to be able to grow to the firm they wanted to be. And so we're going to highlight those as well. So it's been fascinating how this comes together.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, we'll wrap it up, but I think, Ian, I'm very excited to write this book with you. And we are learning so much, and the research data analytics side you bring is somewhat overwhelming and mind-blowing with all of that data and trying to process it. But obviously you and I are learning so much from the profession and from this book. I think it's going to solve a lot of people's issues. It's going to really be kind of a textbook to teach people how do I do this, right? And it's not a book on how to scale a firm, but ultimately we're teaching foundational things that you have to put in place as you scale your firm. It really is a capacity issue, and it's so complicated, and we're going to solve a lot of those complexities. I'm excited.
And I'm excited too. And if you want to follow along, what we've decided together is that we're going to give you insights and literally a roadmap to the book on LinkedIn. So check out our writings up there. You'll be able to dive into these topics and scrimmage it with us in real time as we're working through the book. And again, question. And ask and play a part of the journey, because that's going to influence how we're able to see the world. And we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I have to say, the feedback we get from Karbon firms, those Karbon firms are a different breed. I don't know why that is. I think that's kind of becoming known. You probably know that. Those firms are more intricate, more entrepreneurial, more innovative, and maybe it's because a tool like Karbon that's so broad and solves such complex things attracts that kind of firm owner. I don't know if that's what's happening.
It's because the product was built for what the future was going to be, not necessarily what the past has always been. So that's why those who are looking for an edge and a difference and looking for a way to be more efficient, it just happens to be built the way to be able to support that.
I love it. Okay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed Ian's session at Deeper Weekend that talks about all this.
It was an amazing session, everybody.
It was awesome.
If you weren't there, which probably you're watching Thrivecast, you weren't. It was awesome, but it wasn't as good as Jason's session, which was earlier in the day.
So we do, as we wrap up, we got to say, Julie Shipp, thank you. She's built our firm with me from the ground up, and she is managing us and the publisher. And that's a feat, because you're busy, Ian, and I'm busy.
If you see Julie, you should give her a hug. The reason why this book is getting done and it's being, it's going to make the deadline it's supposed to make is all because of Julie. So I cannot thank Julie enough for everything she does for us collectively.
That's right. Thank you, Julie. Cool. Okay. All right. Let's wrap up, and we'll see you in the capacity book, maybe.
And if you are at Thrival Deeper Weekend, check us out at the wrap-up party, because that will be tomorrow.
That's right. See y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye.